Hello everyone and welcome back to our virtual Mishnah Berurah shiur. We're holding in Mishnah Berurah Chelik Vav. We are continuing to learn Erev Tisha B'Av. We are holding in the midst of Siman Taf Kuf Nun Gimel. We'll be learning today Mirz Hashem Daf Lamed Amid Beis. We pick up on the bottom line of Lamed Amid Aleph near the end of Sif Beis. In the words of the Ramah, on the very bottom line, right next to the Ois Katan Vav for the Mishnah Berurah. So we said yesterday, the Ramah said that our minig is during the week, even though the Chamisha Inuyim, even though the restrictions of Tisha B'Av don't begin until Shkia, nevertheless, the Ramah said, even if you live in a place where they daven Ma'ariv early, so they're going to be davening Ma'ariv Tisha B'Av night before Shkia, the minig is that you take off your shoes before Baruch Hu. And the Mishnah Berurah explained yesterday that in the context of the halacha of not wearing shoes on Tisha B'Av, we say that once you daven Ma'ariv, that's already the beginning of Tisha B'Av, and therefore it's not appropriate to be wearing leather shoes anymore. Now continues the Ramah, and the Ramah says, Ve'imhu Shabbos, if Tisha B'Av is on Shabbos, Ve'imhu Shabbos, If Tisha B'Av is Motzei Shabbos, so now it's Motzei Shabbos, and that's going to be Tisha B'Av night. Ve'imhu Shabbos cholzim la'achar Baruch Hu. If Tisha B'Av begins on Motzei Shabbos, then you don't take off your shoes before Baruch Hu, you take off your shoes after Baruch Hu. Explains the Chavetz Chaim, Ois Katan Vav, Ve'imhu Shabbos cholzim. Why? The Aser Shum Siman Avelos b'Shabbos. You can't take off your shoes before Baruch Hu if right now it's still Shabbos, because then you're showing Avelos, and since you're in Shul, it's even Avelos b'Farhesia on Shabbos, so you can't do that. So then you have to wait to take off your shoes until after Baruch Hu. Once it's already after Baruch Hu, we don't look at it so much as Shabbos anymore. Of course, it's also b'Malacha, you're not allowed to do any Malacha, but it's already after Baruch Hu of Ma'ariv going into Tisha B'Av, now already you could take off your shoes. And says the Chavetz Chaim, in that case, V'lo yiga bahem b'yadav, you should take care not to touch the shoes with your hands, to yetzarach lital yadav, because if you actually do touch the shoes with your hands, you'll have to get up now in the middle of Ma'ariv and go wash your hands, so that you continue davening. Ubediyeved, if you did touch them, im naga, yenake yadav b'chamidi demanki, you don't necessarily have to go get water and wash your hands. You could wipe your hands on anything that cleanses the hands. So if you have a wooden table, you could wipe your hands on the wooden table. Continues the Ramah. So the Ramah says that if Tisha B'Av begins on Motzei Shabbos, so then you take off your shoes after Baruch Hu by Ma'ariv, near the end of the last line here in the Ramah, Lamed Amud Aleph, Milavad Shliach Tzibur, with the exception of the one who's davening Ma'ariv for the Amud on Motzei Shabbos, Shechayletz Kodim Baruch Hu, he takes off his shoes before Baruch Hu. Says the Mishnah Berurah on Lamed Amid Aleph Ois Katan Zayin. Why the distinction between everybody else and the Shliach Tzibur? Everybody else, we're saying, takes off their shoes after Baruch Hu. Why does the Shliach Tzibur take off his shoes before Baruch Hu? Explains the Chavetz Chaim, Mipnei HaTorah, because the Shliach Tzibur, he has Emasa de Tzibura, he has to daven for the Amid in front of everybody, and if he's going to have to go ahead and start davening, V'hu Rachum and Baruch Hu, and then stop and take off his shoes, he might get a little bit agitated and lose his place and forget what he's up to. He has Emasa de Tzibura, he has the fear of the public upon him, and therefore we allow him to take off his shoes before Baruch Hu, so that he could daven for the Amud with a clear mind. But the Chavetz Chaim says, you know what? Really, we should continue with the Ramah before I read the rest of this Mishnah Berurah. So the Ramah says, Malvad Shliach Tzibur Shechayletz Kodim Baruch Hu, and if you turn the page, the Ramah says, Rak Omer Tchila Hamavdil. However, he should say Baruch Hamavdil Ben Kodesh L'Chayil before he takes off his shoes to make a separation between Shabbos and Tisha B'Av so that he's not actually taking off his shoes on Shabbos. Now let's turn back to Lamed Amud Aleph and continue the Mishnah Berurah. Eis Katan Zayin, Ukedei Shelo Yeira'eh Inui B'Shabbos, since we don't want him to be showing Avelos on Shabbos, Omer Tchila Amavdil. He should say first Baruch Hamavdil Mekadosh L'Chayil, Ubeloi Shem Umalchus, but he does not make the bracha using the name of Hashem. He doesn't say Hashem Elokeinu Melech Haolam. He just says Baruch Hamavdil Mekadosh L'Chayil. And that already causes a separation between Shabbos and Tisha B'Av. And now if he takes off his shoes before Baruch Hu, it's not like he's showing any Avelos on Shabbos. Continues the Ramah on the top line of Lamed Amud Beis. V'nohagu, here we're going to have a very important, every Ramah is very important, but a very pertinent and important several lines of Ramah here, and Mishnah Berurah and Biur Halacha. Says the Ramah, V'nohagu, the minig is, Shaloi lilmoid be'erev Tisha B'Av mechatzos ve'elech, that we do not learn Torah on Erev Tisha B'Av, not on Tisha B'Av, on Erev Tisha B'Av, after Chatzos, ki im b'dvarim hamutarim b'Tisha B'Av. If you want to learn Torah on Erev Tisha B'Av after Chatzos, says the Ramah, the minig is, you're only allowed to learn those things that you're allowed to learn on Tisha B'Av itself. So you want to learn the Gemaras that speak about the Churban? Fine. You want to learn Iyuv? Fine. You want to learn Hilchas Avelus? Fine. But you want to learn Daf Yomi, you want to be Mavisedra, you want to learn your regular Sidrei Halimud, you want to learn Dirshu, Daf Yomi, Ba'alacha, and it's not holding in Hilchas Tisha B'Av, if it's holding somewhere else, you're not allowed to learn on Erev Tisha B'Av after Chatzos. So says the Ramah. The Ramah doesn't say you're not allowed to. The Ramah says V'nohagu. That is the minig. Now, this is the introduction of this concept, this halacha of an isser of learning Torah on Erev Tisha B'Av. Now, we're going to see that this is a very strange isser. What is it based on? It's based on the pasuk in Tehillim. David HaMelech says, Pekudei Hashem Yesharim Mesamchei Lev. The precepts of Hashem are straight, and Mesamchei Lev, they make the heart rejoice. Make the heart rejoice, Simchas Halev is not appropriate to Erev Tisha B'Av. Now that's very interesting, because there are no other of the halachas that pertain on Tisha B'Av, that apply to Tisha B'Av itself. None of them apply to Erev Tisha B'Av. You're allowed to wear leather shoes on Erev Tisha B'Av. You're allowed to wash and bathe on Erev Tisha B'Av. It's only this one restriction, the restriction against limud HaTorah, that somehow applies on Erev Tisha B'Av, besides applying on Tisha B'Av itself. And we're going to have to see why. So let's take a look here in the Mishnah Berurah. Says the Mishnah Berurah, nice cut and ches. V'nagu, the minig is that we do not learn Torah after Chatzos on Erev Tisha B'Av, unless we're learning something that you're allowed to learn on Tisha B'Av itself. Says the Chavetz Chaim, what's the reason for this isser? The Torah misamachas halev, because learning Torah makes the heart rejoice, and rejoicing is inappropriate to Erev Tisha B'Av. Says the Chavetz Chaim, umikol makom, nevertheless, despite the fact that the Ramah says that we have such a minig not to learn Torah after Chatzos and Erev Tisha B'Av, kol zeh einoi midina, this is not really aser min hadin, it's a minig. The hamuter be'erev Tisha B'Av midina kol hachamisha inuyim, because all of the chamisha inuyim, all of the 5 restrictions in which we pain ourselves on Tisha B'Av, right? Achila, we don't eat, we don't drink, rechitza, washing, sicha, anointing ourselves, tashva shamita, marital relations, ni'ilos hasandal, wearing shoes. None of these apply on Erev Tisha B'Av. So why is there an isser against learning Torah on Erev Tisha B'Av? Explains the Chavetz Chaim, like we said, v'ikar atam, the main reason why we could make such an isser on Erev Tisha B'Av is mishum dehu yachal lilmod dvarim hamutarim b'Tisha B'Av. The rationale is, says the Chavetz Chaim, we know that Pekudei Hashem Yesharim Mesamchei Lev. We know that learning Torah makes the heart rejoice, and that isn't appropriate for Erev Tisha B'Av. So we're going to asa learning Torah. Now you'll say, asa learning Torah, that's very extreme. You're going to asa learning Torah on Erev Tisha B'Av. We don't asa anything else. Says the Chavetz Chaim, we're not really asering learning Torah. You want to learn Torah? Fine. Take out a Yeridea and learn Hilchas Avelus. take out an Orach Chaim and learn Siman Tov Kuf Nun Daled in Orach Chaim. Learn Hilchas Tisha B'Av. You want to take out a Masechtas Gittin and you want to learn the Gemaras that speak about the Churban. So there are plenty of things that you're allowed to learn. You have a hankering to learn Nach, take out an Iyuv and learn Iyuv. So there are plenty of things that you are allowed to learn. Therefore, says the Chavetz Chaim, it's not such a stretch. We're not asering limud HaTorah after Chatzos on Erev Tisha B'Av. We're restricting what you should learn. Don't learn things that are Mesameach Halev. Instead, learn things that are appropriate to Tisha B'Av. Learn sad things. Learn the Chasavelos. Learn Iyuv, etc. Now, the Dirshu Mishnah Berurah, in a footnote, brings down a very interesting Chassam Sofer. If you take a look in Dirshu footnote number 11, it says over here, Ubetam HaMinig, the rationale for restricting what you're allowed to learn on Erev Tisha B'Av after Chatzos is, Kasav B'Shalos Teshuvas Chassam Sofer. If you look in the Shalos Teshuvas Chassam Sofer, he says, Shekol Ma Sheloimid Mechatzos Ve'elech. Whatever you're going to learn on Erev Tisha B'Av late in the day after Chatzos, Gam la'achar mikein machshavtoi olav. If you learn something, you learn a geshmak sugya after Chatzos on Erev Tisha B'Av, you're going to be thinking about it later in the day. Umaharer oidoisav balayla. You're going to be thinking about it that night. If you learn Daf Yomi at 4 o'clock in the afternoon on Erev Tisha B'Av, you're going to have a geshmak piece of Gemara that you learned to Daf Yomi. So then Tisha B'Av by night, when you come home after Ma'ariv, you'll be thinking about it. The nimtza, so it comes out, shenichnas la'avelus Tisha B'Av, you're entering into the morning of Tisha B'Av, kishehu sameach. You're entering into Tisha B'Av with the simcha of limud HaTorah upon you. Because you can't just turn off your mind like a switch. You learned Daf Yomi at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, you're going to think about it tonight. The Hoisif, and the Chassam Sofer adds on, Shazah tam lesar salimud lacha chatzos kam kishe erev Tisha B'Av oy Tisha B'Av chal b'Shabbos. This is why we're going to see that the Ramah says even if Erev Tisha B'Av falls out on Shabbos, or if Tisha B'Av falls out on Shabbos, and the Tainus is a nidche to Sunday, the Ramah is going to say you also do not learn after Chatzos on Erev Tisha B'Av, even though it's Shabbos, and on Shabbos we're not noyig any avelus. Still in all, you can't learn Torah after Chatzos. Why? Because very nice that it's Shabbos. But the bottom line is, if we're going to allow you to learn Torah late in the afternoon on Shabbos, when it's Erev Tisha B'Av, you're going to think about it at night, on Tisha B'Av. So the Chassam Sofer says, that's why we answer it. Even though on Shabbos we don't keep any Dinei Avelus, even if Tisha B'Av falls out on Shabbos. Even if Shabbos is Tisha B'Av itself, you're allowed to eat meat, you're allowed to drink wine. So how is it that Torah you're not allowed to learn after Chatzos? Because the problem is that you're learning the Torah on Shabbos after Chatzos. Normally we would allow that because we're going to tell you shouldn't keep any Dinei Avelos on Shabbos. But we can't let you learn Torah after Chatzos because it's very nice now at Shabbos, but you're going to think about that Torah on Motzei Shabbos. So you're going to have the Pekudei Ashar Mesamchei Leiv on Motzei Shabbos when it's already Tisha B'Av. Since the Simchas HaTorah is going to extend into the night, that's why we have to aser it on Shabbos, says the Chassam Sofer. This is a very nice Chassam Sofer. It explains a lot, but it also shows you another thing. It also shows you how the Chassam Sofer thought about the Torah HaKadoshah. To the Chassam Sofer, it was a davar pashut, that if you learn something geshmak in the afternoon, it's going to be on your mind later in the night, and it's going to cause you simcha on Tisha B'Av, which is problematic. Okay, so let's go back into the Mishnah Berurah Ois Katan Ches. We're about 4 lines down in the Mishnah Berurah, at least in my print. So far we've had the Ramah introduced the concept that on Erev Tisha B'Av after Chatzos, we have a minig not to learn Torah. Okay, and we explained the rationale why that would be. We have this beautiful Chassam Sofer. Now, says the Mishnah Berurah, from the words of many Achrayim, it is implied shetafsu haminig hazeh, that they grabbed hold of and they accept this minig of the Ramah, v'lo iraru alav, and they don't argue on it. They accept it. Da'afilu im chol b'Shabbos, and even when Erev Tisha B'Av falls out on Shabbos, Hiskimu kama achronim. Many achronim agree lehisnai k'moshe kasav harama, to act in the way that the Ramah suggests, not to learn Torah on Erev Tisha B'Av, even if Erev Tisha B'Av is Shabbos. You don't learn Torah after Chatzos. U'k'moshe echtav l'kamei, as the Mishnah Berurah is going to discuss later on. Amnam, however, says the Chavetz Chaim, yesh eiz achronim, there are those achronim shekpikpeku ma'oid ala minig hazeh, who take great issue with this minig not to learn Torah after Chatzos on Erev Tisha B'Av. Rishon Lakoil, first and foremost amongst these achronim, says the Chavetz Chaim, Harashal is the Marshal, Kasvu, Olav, they write on him, Shaloma ba'atzmai achar Chatzos, that he himself learnt Torah after Chatzos on Erev Tisha B'Av, v'hitter gam la'acherim bazeh, and he allowed others to learn on Erev Tisha B'Av after Chatzos as well. Gam ha'gra b'Berurah, so to the Gra in the Berurah Gra, Kasav writes, the Chumra Yiserihi. He writes that this is too great a Chumra. This is an extraneous Chumra to aser limud HaTorah on Erev Tisha B'Av after Chatzos. V'chein ha'mamar Mordechai b'sifroi marich bazeh. And so too the Maimar Mordechai writes at great length about this, and I'm going to read you the text of the Maimar Mordechai in the Bir Halacha. The Kosav, and he writes, to whom maybe harbe lidei bittul Torah. This brings a tremendous amount of bittul Torah. Lahaloimdim, amongst those who learn Torah. Shemisrashim lilmai dvar mamutarim b'Tisha B'Av. Because it's Erev Tisha B'Av after Chatzos, and they keep this chumrah not to learn Torah on Erev Tisha B'Av after Chatzos unless they're going to learn something that you're allowed to learn on Tisha B'Av, and then they don't learn. Because they ain't adam loimei delamasha libei chafetz. Because we know that Chazal tell us a person only learns what his heart has a desire to learn. That's what a person is going to be interested in learning. That's what's going to capture him and hold him. He doesn't necessarily want to learn right now Hilchas Avelos. He's not holding Hilchas Avelos. Val Kain, and therefore Daita Lahakal Bazeh, the opinion of the Maimar Mordechai is to be Mekel. The Kos of the Kain Hayahu Noyik, and he writes that was his minig ayin sham. The Chayin Chai Adam Kos of the Chumra Ba'alma, and the Chai Adam also writes that this is a Chumra Ba'alma. This is an unnecessary stringency. Val Kain, and therefore says the Chavetz Chaim, Nira, it appears to him, Demisha Roitze Lahakel Bazeh, somebody who wants to be Mekel, and he wants to allow himself to learn his regular Sidrei Halimud on Erev Tisha B'Av after Chatzos, Ein Moichin B'Yadai, we cannot complain, we don't object to what he's doing. We don't want to cause bittul Torah. The whole, like the Mishnah Berurah said in the beginning of this Mishnah Berurah, the whole idea over here was, it's not such a big deal that we aser limud HaTorah, because we're not really asering limud HaTorah. We're telling you, you want to learn things that you're allowed to learn on Tisha B'Av. But like the Maimar Mordechai says, a lot of people aren't going to jump away from their regular limudim and then go learn Iv on Erev Tisha B'Av. So instead what's going to happen is, they're going to put down their regular Sidrei HaLimud, they're going to get busy with other things, and they're not going to learn Torah at all. Better that they should learn Torah. Now I see I made a mark over here, I don't particularly remember what it was, but Dirshu footnote number 12. Oh, it says over here in Dirshu footnote number 12, V'chein nahagu b'yeshivas Radin, they bring down over here from a sefer about the Chavetz Chaim, that this was the minig in Radin, in the Chavetz Chaim's yeshiva, that they did learn Torah after Chatzos on Erev Tisha B'Av, even the regular Sidrei HaLimud, al pi hayras HaChavetz Chaim, based on the psak of the Chavetz Chaim, their minig was, lilmaid b'yom zeh k'b'chol yom acher, that they learned on Erev Tisha B'Av the same way they learned on any other day. Ubishalos Teshuvas Arlutzion Kasav Sha'av Shalachatchila Yesh Lehimana Mililmay Dvar Masurim B'Tisha B'Av. The Arlutzion writes, even though really Lechatchila you should refrain from learning regular Sidrei HaLimud on Erev Tisha B'Av. Instead, you should only learn things that you're allowed to learn on Tisha B'Av. B'Kamakayim, nevertheless, Misha Kashalay Adavar, somebody for whom this is difficult, V'yesh Chashash Shemach Mazeg Yispatel Milimudai. And there is a chash, there is a concern that if you'll tell him he could only learn things he's allowed to learn on Tisha B'Av, he'll just be mevatel. Yachal lismay chalamakilim, he can rely on those who are lenient. V'yalamid b'makom shali b'chafetz, and he could learn whatever his heart desires. Me'yedach, on the other hand, a chazanish hayra, the chazanish paskin, shafilu be'erev Tisha B'Av shechal b'Shabbos, that even when Erev Tisha B'Av falls out on Shabbos, ein lilmoid acha chatzos ela b'dvar ma'vitarm lilmoid b'Tisha B'Av, better you should only learn not better. You should only learn things that you are allowed to learn on Tisha B'Av. Now, it does so happen that I have heard from my Rebbe, Berurah soll sein gesund, many times over the years. He happens to be very makbid on this. He's very makbid that you shouldn't learn on Erev Tisha B'Av after Chatzos, only things that you're allowed to learn on Tisha B'Av. However, having said that, what Berurah always says is, why would you learn something that you're not allowed to learn on Tisha B'Av, on Erev Tisha B'Av after Chatzos? We have a Ramah. The Ramah says that the minig is not to learn Torah after Chatzos and Erev Tisha B'Av. So of course you're going to learn things that you're allowed to learn on Tisha B'Av. So by Berurah is a davar pashut that you're not going to be mevatel. If you would tell Berurah, I'm going to be mevatel, so I once heard one of his talmidim, or meaning a talmid in the yeshiva, say, I'm going to be mevatel. So Berurah looked at him and said, okay, so if you're going to be mevatel, of course you should learn something else. But that's crazy. Why would you be mevatel? Don't be mevatel. Learn something that you're allowed to learn on Tisha B'Av. He couldn't comprehend this idea that of course you're going to learn, but of course you're going to learn something that you're allowed to learn on Tisha B'Av. What, just because you can't learn what you would regularly learn, so now you're telling me you're going to be mevatel, and now you want a heter to ignore a Ramah? He couldn't even comprehend it. But I think he would certainly agree that if the fact is that a person is going to be mevatel, and otherwise he would be learning, go learn. We need the schus of Torah in the world. So go learn. You could rely on this Mishnah Berurah. The Mishnah Berurah is machriya. He says very clearly, you want to be meichel and you want to be meichel and you want to learn daf yomi. You're a daf yomi yid and you want to learn daf yomi after Chatzos and Erev Tisha B'Av. And if not, you're not going to learn. Go ahead and learn. 100% you should learn. Now let's read it's a little bit lengthy, but I think it's kedai to read this biur halacha over here. Biur halacha dibra maskil v'lachein imchal b'Shabbos einoim. Well, you know what? Why am I reading the biur halacha if we didn't do the Ramah first? Let's go back into the Ramah. So the Ramah said on the top line, v'nagu shaloi lilmoid b'erev Tisha B'Av mechatzos v'elech kiyim b'dvar ma'mutar b'Tisha B'Av. Now continues the Ramah v'lachein, and therefore imchal b'Shabbos, if Erev Tisha B'Av falls out on Shabbos, ein oimrim Pirkei Avos. We don't say Pirkei Avos. If Tisha B'Av is Sunday and Erev Tisha B'Av is Shabbos, so you might have thought that on Shabbos we're not going to restrict learning Torah. No, says the Ramah, that on Shabbos also we're going to restrict learning Torah after Chatzos, and don't even say Pirkei Avos. Note that he doesn't say ein loimdim Pirkei Avos. He doesn't say we don't learn Pirkei Avos. He says ein oimrim Pirkei Avos. We don't even just recite Pirkei Avos after Chatzos on Shabbos, if Shabbos is Erev Tisha B'Av, because of this minig not to learn Torah after Chatzos and Erev Tisha B'Av. And the Ramah says very clearly, it even applies when Erev Tisha B'Av falls out on Shabbos. Says the Mishnah Berurah's cut and test, v'lachein imchal b'Shabbos. The words of the Ramah are, if it falls out on Shabbos. If what falls out on Shabbos? Says the Chavetz Chaim, hainu afilu Erev Tisha B'Av shechal b'Shabbos, even if Erev Tisha B'Av, not Tisha B'Av. Tisha B'Av is Sunday. If Erev Tisha B'Av falls out on Shabbos, ein oimrim Pirkei Avos. We don't say Pirkei Avos after Chatzos. Tehu kalimah Torah, because even just reciting Pirkei Avos is like learning Torah. V'hainu achar Chatzos, and clearly the Ramah is talking about after Chatzos. The kaidem Chatzos, if we're talking about before Chatzos, mutar b'limud Torah afilu k'shechal b'Shabbos. You're allowed to learn Torah before Chatzos, even if Tisha B'Av itself falls out on Shabbos. So clearly, the Ramah is talking about after Chatzos. And the Ramah is telling you very clearly that if Erev Tisha B'Av falls out on Shabbos, you still have this minig not to learn Torah after Chatzos, and even just reciting Pirkei Avos would be a problem. Ois Katan Yud, Ein Oimrim, we don't say Pirkei Avos. Says the Chavetz Chaim, V'ataz mefakfek ma'oid, al manias halimud b'Shabbos. The Taz takes great issue with this concept that we're going to restrict learning Torah on Shabbos. Or Messiahim, and the Taz concludes, the haloimid b'Shabbos achar Chatzos, somebody who learns Torah on Shabbos, Erev Tisha B'Av after Chatzos, lo yihifsid scharoi. He doesn't lose the schar that he gets for limud HaTorah. V'hainu afilu kishachal Tisha B'Av b'Shabbos. And this is true even if Shabbos is not Erev Tisha B'Av, if Shabbos is Tisha B'Av itself. Excuse me. And the tainus is a nidche to Sunday. Still you could learn Torah on Shabbos. Certainly if Shabbos is only Erev Tisha B'Av, the Taz says you're allowed to learn. V'nira, and again, the Mishnah Berurah is machriya, and the Mishnah Berurah says v'nira, it seems to him, to yesh lismai chalzeh, that we could be saimach on this Taz, acharei da'afilu kishachal b'choil kama acharei nemekilin. Because we see that even if Erev Tisha B'Av is during the week, the Mishnah Berurah said in Ois Ches, that many acharayim say even if Erev Tisha B'Av falls out during the week, we shouldn't restrict Torah learning after Chatzos on Erev Tisha B'Av. So if it's Shabbos, certainly the Chavetz Chaim says that you could be saimach on this. So you see very strongly that the Mishnah Berurah was not happy with this idea of restricting Torah learning on Erev Tisha B'Av, certainly not if Erev Tisha B'Av is Shabbos. He wasn't happy with the idea of restricting learning. Now let's take a look at this biur halacha. V'lachein imchal b'Shabbos ein oimrim Pirkei Avos. Says the Chavetz Chaim, Ayin b'Mishnah Berurah. Take a look at what I've written in the Mishnah Berurah. V'zeh lashon ha'Maimon Mordechai, and these are the words of the Maimon Mordechai that the Mishnah Berurah mentioned in the Mishnah Berurah. Says the Maimon Mordechai, Hayra zeh tamuahi. This psak of the Ramaz that we shouldn't say Pirkei Avos when Shabbos is Erev Tisha B'Av after Chatzos is a wonder. And the Maimon Mordechai says, I've already seen some of the Achrayim who scream about this, and they say that this is a wondrous psak. Amnam harav Magen Avram kiem divrei Ramazal. However, the Magen Avram does strengthen and establish the words of the Ramah. V'herich bazeh, and the Magen Avram speaks about this Ramah at length. Ula b'saif, and at the end, CM, he concludes, Ve'eich shiur. No, I'm sorry, I misspoke. Amnam, the Maimon Mordechai says, Amnam harav Magen Avram kiem divrei Ramazal. The Maimon Mordechai says that the Magen Avram establishes this psak of the Ramah. V'herich bazeh, and the Maimon Mordechai speaks about this at great length. Ula b'saif, and at the end, the Maimon Mordechai CM concludes, and he says like this: Ve'eich shiur, whatever you'll say, nira la'ani az daiti. The Maimon Mordechai says, it appears to my humble opinion, de'ein lachish lazeh, that we should not concern ourselves with this psak of the Ramah. Lefi she'ein lanu tam nacha in lesser limud b'Shabbos klal. We have no proper reasoning at all to restrict Torah learning on Shabbos, especially when Shabbos is Erev Tisha B'Av. Umashakasav Arav Magen Avram lahachmir, and this that the Magen Avram writes that we should rule stringently like the Ramah, mitam diyachal lilmay dvar mamutarim b'Tisha B'Av, because the Magen Avram, like I explained before, says we could paskin like the Ramah, because we're not really restricting Torah learning, we're not asering Torah learning, we're telling you learn, just learn things that you're allowed to learn on Tisha B'Av. Says the Maimon Mordechai, I say, she'ein zeh maspik. That is not a good enough reason to tell people that they should be noyeg like the Ramah and they shouldn't learn on Erev Tisha B'Av after Chatzos. Levi she'ein adam loimin ela ma sheli by chafetz. Because the fact is, people only involve themselves in learning when it's something that they're comfortable and happy learning with, what they desire to learn. Ve'einenu harayos, and the Maimon Mordechai says, our eyes have seen. The kama talmidei chachamim, many even who the Maimon Mordechai calls talmidei chachamim, misrashlim b'limud hamuter, they are weak and they don't learn the things that they're allowed to learn b'yom Tisha B'Av atzmai, on Tisha B'Av itself, on Tisha B'Av. Forget Shabbos. On Tisha B'Av, when Tisha B'Av falls out during the week, everybody has to deal with this isser that you're not allowed to learn Torah. Nobody argues on that. You're not allowed to learn Torah on Tisha B'Av. But says the Maimon Mordechai, even on Tisha B'Av itself, there are many people, even Talmidei Chachamim, who end up being mevatel. They don't learn Torah on Tisha B'Av because they're not going to learn something that they're allowed to learn on Tisha B'Av. They're not comfortable suddenly diving into Iyuv, or suddenly diving into Ilchas Avelus, or diving into the Gemaras that speak about the Churban. And the Mamar Mordechai says, I'm one of them. I don't learn on Tisha B'Av as much as I should, because I don't learn the things that you're allowed to learn on Tisha B'Av. I'm just reading what the Mamar Mordechai says about himself. I'm not saying it. And therefore says the Mamar Mordechai, Eini chayshish l'svara zu. I do not concern myself with this psak of the Ramah. V'daitin noite, and my opinion leans, lahatir afilu b'chol, to be matter learning Torah on Erev Tisha B'Av, even when Erev Tisha B'Av is during the week. Certainly, the Mamar Mordechai says, I'm matter learning Torah after Chatzos on Erev Tisha B'Av, when Erev Tisha B'Av is on Shabbos. But even if Erev Tisha B'Av is during the week, the Mamar Mordechai says, he leans to be matter learning Torah until right before Shkia. And this is very interesting. And this is one of the reasons I wanted to read this Biur Halacha. You should see how strongly the Mamar Mordechai felt about this. If not for the fact that I fear my friends, I fear my Chabura, Hava Amina, I would have said, Da'afilu b'yom Tisha B'Av atzmai, that even on Tisha B'Av itself, when Tisha B'Av is during the week, a regular Tisha B'Av, Haya lanu lahakel, we should be makel and we should allow regular Torah learning on Tisha B'Av itself. The ba'avoneseinu arabim niskalkalu adoros, the generations have become ruined and weak. Ubiyom Tisha B'Av atzmai, and on Tisha B'Av itself, mitailin b'shvakim, people go for walks in the street. Umasichin sichas chulin, and they sit around and they schmooze. Or you go out nowadays to the bungalow colonies and the vacation homes, and you see that on Tisha B'Av afternoon, you have people playing games, you have people sitting around under the trees, you have people doing whatever, they go shopping. Va'afilu ha'yoidim sefer, even the ones who know how to learn a shtickle. Uktzas ha'loimdim, and some of the loimdei Torah, mekilin bazeh, they're very mekel, they're very lenient in this. Upshita, the ba'ofen zeh, Mamar Mordechai says, Upshita, it's obvious, the ba'ofen zeh, that in such a situation, tvei heavy adaf lahu lilmoid. If you're going to see some yeshivalite sitting around under a tree and shmuzing sichas chulin, or just going for a walk, or this or that on Tisha B'Av afternoon, says the Mamar Mordechai, it's a davar pashut, it would be better if they would be sitting in the Beis Medrash, and they would be learning their regular Sidrei HaLimud. V'kiyotza b'davar matzinu b'Yerushalmi, and the Mamar Mordechai says, I have precedent to what I'm saying from a Yerushalmi that we learned together when we were learning Hilchas Chalamayid. The Yerushalmi says, I'm a Rav Abba Bar Maimel, ilu hayamisha yismani imi, if there would be somebody who would join me, hayisi matir malacha b'chalamayid. Rav Abba Bar Maimel says in Yerushalmi, if there would be somebody who would join together with me, I would be matir malacha on chalamayid. Klum asru elikadeshi yoichlin v'shaisin usmeichin v'oiskin b'Torah. Why is malacha asr on chalamayid? Malacha is asr on chalamayid so that people should be oisik b'Torah. They should sit there and have a beautiful Yom Tov meal on Chalamayid. They should spend time with their families. So that's why we ask them malach on Chalamayid. So it should be ashtik al Yom Tov. V'chadon inu noichlin v'shaitzin upaychzin. But nowadays people make parties and it's not Yom Tov. So they're not doing malach shamayim. They're not being oisik b'mitzvah on Chalamayid. So what? So we're asking malacha so that they should sit around and they should be yoshiv a bottle. So Rabbi Bar Maimel said, if it was up to me, I would be matir malacha on Chalamayid. Better let them do malacha. Adkan. Va'af anu noimar. And so too, says the Mordechai, so too we say over here, be'inyan Tisha B'Av. Klum asra limud. Why did we ask for learning Torah on Tisha B'Av? Elikadeshu yoshvin be'inyanit tsar va'avelus, so that somebody should be aggravated and he should be in mourning. Umitach kach zeichrin v'dayigen al chorban abayis. And he should be sitting and he should be in Avelus and he should be worrying over the loss of the Beis HaMikdash. And instead they're going for walks and they're sitting around Yoshev Bottle, they're schmoozing. And they're anyway Mesiach Das from morning. So they sit down, they play a game, they waste time. So the Maimon Mordechai says, I would be matter learning Torah even on Tisha B'Av itself. However, since it's a clear Isser that's brought down in Shas and Paiskim, that you're not allowed to learn Torah on Tisha B'Av, Pshita dein lanu koich lahakal. We don't have the ability to go mimekel against halacha that said beferish in Shas and Paiskim that you're not allowed to learn Torah on Tisha B'Av. So there's nothing I can do about that. I can't be matter learning Torah on Tisha B'Av itself. And somebody who cares about his nefesh will distance himself from just wasting time and going for walks and fooling around on Tisha B'Av. And hopefully the Rebbeinu Shalom will forgive those that are shoygigim, those who do it inadvertently. Amnon, however, Erev Tisha B'Av, this Isser of the Ramaz, this that the Ramaz says that we're knowing not to learn Torah after Chatzos on Erev Tisha B'Av, yesh lahakel. The Maimon Mordechai says we should be mekel. Kevin shalihusker b'shasu paiskim. He says such an Isser is not brought down in Shasu paiskim. So therefore, says the Maimon Mordechai, we should not be noyig like this Ramah. And learn Torah. Better learn Torah on Erev Tisha B'Av after Chatzos than wasting time. V'chein ani noyig af b'choil. And the Maimon Mordechai says that's what I do even when Erev Tisha B'Av falls out during the week. V'samichta baha al marshal zal. And I rely on the marshal that the Mishnah Berurah brought down. Umikamakim, nevertheless, misha margish ba'atzmai. If somebody feels on himself, sheyuchal litchait, that he could push himself, v'lilmai dvarim hamutarim, and he can learn on Erev Tisha B'Av after Chatzos those things that you're allowed to learn on Tisha B'Av, v'lo yemait mipnei zel bilimudai, and he will not reduce the amount of time that he learns Torah, and maybe even the depth of his learning he won't reduce if he learns those things. Kadosh yeyom aloi. So say to him that he's a kadosh. Fine, he's a holy person, and in Lichirami he should do so. And I think that's what Reb Ruven means when Reb Ruven tells the Talmidim in yeshiva, why should you learn Erev Tisha B'Av after Chatzos, something that you're not allowed to learn on Tisha B'Av? Learn something that you are allowed to learn on Tisha B'Av. He expects of the Talmidim kadosh yeyom aloi. What do you mean? You're a yeshiva man. You should be a kadosh. Make it your business to be a kadosh. But if you're not going to, so then learn something else. Learn anything. The Maimon Mordechai says, somebody will say, "Oi, I'm being mekel and I'm learning Torah. I'm learning my regular sidra limud on Erev Tisha B'Av after Chatzos in defiance of the Ramah." Yeah, but you're doing it l'shem shamayim, because if you don't, you're going to be mevatel Torah. Ad kan l'shayne. Those are the words of the Maimon Mordechai. Okay, so what we see over here clearly from the words of the Ramah together with the words of the Mishnah Berurah, we have over here the Ramah's minig not to learn Torah on Erev Shabbos, on Erev Tisha B'Av after Chatzos. The Ramah extends that minig even when Erev Tisha B'Av falls out on Erev Shabbos. On both of these cases, the Ramah said that you could rely, the Mishnah Berurah said that you could rely in the case of when it falls out during the week. In Ois Kat Neches, he said, he was coming off of the Marshal and the Gra. And then in Ois Kat Yud, when Erev Tisha B'Av falls out on Shabbos, he says you could rely on the Taz. And in both cases, he says you could learn on Erev Tisha B'Av, whether it's during the week or it's on Shabbos, you could learn. And it seems that on Shabbos also, the Taz in Mishnah Berurah is cut in Yud. The Mishnah Berurah said, "V'hainu afilu kishachal Tisha B'Av b'Shabbos." That the Taz says even when Tisha B'Av itself falls out on Shabbos, you could learn Torah after Chatzos on Shabbos, on Erev Tisha B'Av. And the Mishnah Berurah said, "V'nira the yesh l'smach hazeh." Okay. Now let's finish off this Siman. Just the last few words of the Ramah. The Ramah says, "V'chein lo yitayel Erev Tisha B'Av," and also people should not just go for a walk on Erev Tisha B'Av. Erev Tisha B'Av is not a time for just frivolous pursuits. I thought we would get to begin Siman Tavkuf Nun Daled, but we're going to stop over here. Mir Hashem, we'll start Siman Tavkuf Nun Daled tomorrow. There's very little Mishnah Berurah on the Mechaber on this page, so hopefully we won't have a problem concluding Lamed Aleph Amud Aleph tomorrow, even though there is a lot of Mishnah Berurah on tomorrow's daf. Okay, we'll see how it goes. Thank you so much for joining me for limud HaTorah. The schus of limud HaTorah should be megan against Klal Yisrael. The Rebbeinu Shalom should send Yeshuas and Refuas and Parnasa to all those in need. The Rebbeinu Shalom should bring us to a zman of simcha. The Rebbeinu Shalom should bring a ruach of tanchumin, a ruach of simcha to the world, make things easier for people. Halvai, the Rebbeinu Shalom is pushing us. The Rebbeinu Shalom is pushing us to bring us to a better place. The Rebbeinu Shalom is pushing us to bring the Bias Gal Tzedek b'meher v'yameinu. Amen. Be well.